There are family secrets that should die with us, but there are others that need to be told so they never happen again. And mine is the kind that burns your soul until it comes out through your lips. Imagine being trapped by your 15 brothers and paralyzed, not knowing what to do. Good afternoon, my dears. My name is Mary Cooper, but everyone here calls me Grandma Mary or Grandma Mary. I'm 78 years old, born in February 1946 in a small town you've probably never heard of, Pine Creek, deep in rural Alabama, where the sun cracked the earth and families hid behind tall gates and even taller silences. I was born in a time when women had no voice, children had no rights, and patriarchs ruled like kings over their little empires. My story is about one of those families that from the outside seemed blessed by God, but inside held secrets that still wake me up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. Folks, tell me in the comments what corner of America you're watching this old woman tell her memories from, and also tell me your name so I know who you are. And if you're enjoying this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. You don't know how it warms my heart and gives me strength to share these memories with you. I'm the daughter of Joseph Cooper, a man known in town as a prosperous farmer, owner of land as far as the eye could see, and a large family that was the envy of many. To those looking from afar, we were living proof that God blesses those who work hard and respect family. But family, my dears, is sometimes just a pretty word to disguise the greatest horrors that can happen behind closed doors. My father was a tall man with broad shoulders, calloused hands, and a voice that didn't need to be raised to be obeyed. He had those small, piercing eyes that seemed to see through people, discovering lies before they were even told. He always wore cotton shirts, a leather hat, and boots that made noise on the cement floor of the big house, announcing his presence before he even appeared. Joseph Cooper wasn't just my father. He was the absolute patriarch of a family that had grown in a very particular way. Besides me, the only girl, 15 boys and young men lived on our property whom he called my sons, although not all were actually his biological sons. It had started when I was still very small. My father had a very personal philosophy about family and responsibility. When one of his brothers went through difficulties, when a cousin became an orphan, when a distant relative had nowhere to leave their male children, Daddy would open the doors of our house. Family helps family, he would say, and a man who respects himself doesn't let his own blood suffer. So, over the years, our house filled with boys. There were my 3 legitimate brothers, John, Peter, and Michael, who were children from my father's first marriage. There were the 5 sons he had with my mother after me, Anthony, Frank, Joseph Jr., Manuel, and Severino. And there were the 7 cousins who came to live with us at different times, sons of uncles who died, relatives who emigrated, families that fell apart for reasons no one properly explained to a little girl. Our house was immense, built in the style of old plantation homes, with 3 different wings connected by long corridors and porches that went completely around the building. The main wing was where my father and mother's rooms were, along with the living room, dining room, and the large kitchen where Miss Connie, our cook, prepared food for almost 20 people every day. In the east wing were the rooms of the older boys, each room accommodating 2 or 3 of them, where the men's conversations happened, the secrets I couldn't know, the decisions that were made far from female ears. In the west wing were the younger boys, always supervised by the older ones, in a rigid hierarchy that Daddy had established from day one. And me? I had my own room in the main wing, very close to my parents' room, as was proper for the only girl in the house. A room with a white-painted iron bed, a hardwood wardrobe that had belonged to my grandmother, and a window that looked out onto the inner courtyard where the chickens scratched and where I spent afternoons embroidering or helping Mama with household chores. Mama's name was Rose Cooper, a small, delicate woman who had come from Georgia to marry Daddy when I was only 2 years old. She was my stepmother, but never made any difference between me and the children she had later. Rose was a woman of few words, always busy with something, tending the garden, supervising the cleaning of the house, organizing meals, sewing clothes for that crowd of men who lived with us. She had small but strong hands, always smelling of soap and lavender water, and a loving way of smoothing my hair when I came near her on quiet afternoons. Mama Rose never talked about the past, never told me what her life was like before she came to our farm. It was as if she had been born on the day she married Daddy, and everything that came before no longer mattered. The routine of our house was like a Swiss clock. Everything worked on the right schedule. Each person knew exactly what their role was, and no one dared question the rules Daddy had established. We all woke up at 5 in the morning to the sound of the bell he rang on the porch. The boys went out to do the field work, taking care of the cattle, feeding the pigs, working in the corn and bean plantation that supported all those people. I stayed at home with Mama, learning women's chores. I helped prepare breakfast for almost 20 people, washed and ironed all those men's clothes, took care of the chickens, watered the garden. It was a hard life, but at the time I thought it was normal. I didn't know any other way to live, didn't know there were families different from ours. Daddy controlled everything with an iron hand. He decided what clothes each person would wear, what food would be served, what work each boy would do, even what time they could stay awake. No one left the property without his permission. No one received visitors without him knowing. No one spoke too loudly or laughed too loudly when he was around. But his control over me was even greater. I couldn't talk alone with any of the boys. Couldn't even go out to the yard without Mama's company. Couldn't wear dresses he considered provocative, which in his head was anything that showed the ankle or wasn't completely closed at the neck. A proper woman doesn't give cause for gossip, he always said. And my daughter will be a proper woman, even if I have to break the legs of anyone who dares look at her with malice. The boys in the house were of various ages. The oldest, John and Peter, were already over 20 and helped Daddy with the more serious business of the farm. They were grown men with thick beards and rough hands from so much work, whom Daddy treated almost like junior partners. They even had permission to go into town on Saturdays, as long as they returned before nightfall and didn't bring bad influences into the house. The middle ones, which included my biological brothers Michael, Anthony, and Frank, were between 15 and 19 years old. They were the loudest, the ones who sometimes tested the limits of Daddy's patience, the ones who dreamed of the day they could leave that property and see the world outside. But they were also the most loyal to Daddy, the ones who most reproduced his behaviors and opinions. And the youngest, from 10 to 14 years old, were a mixture of orphaned cousins and my younger brothers. These always lived in awe, always trying to please the older ones, always afraid of doing something wrong that would result in a beating or a punishment that could last weeks, because Daddy wasn't a man of conversation when someone disobeyed. His correction came in the form of double work, reduced food, or even a good spanking with the leather belt he wore at his waist. Those who don't learn through words, learn through pain, he always said. And everyone in that house knew he was serious. Our property was almost an hour's drive from the town of Pine Creek, on a dirt road that turned to mud during the rainy season and to dust in the dry season. We were isolated from the world, a complete family living almost like a small country with its own laws and customs. Daddy liked this isolated life. He said there were many temptations in town, many bad influences, many people who weren't decent. In here I know what happens, he used to say. I know who comes in, who goes out, what everyone does. Here my family is protected from the world out there. And it was true. We were protected from the world out there. But no one protected me from the world that existed inside that house, in the dark corridors, in the back rooms, in the heavy silences that fell over all of us whenever Daddy left to do business in town. It was on a Friday in March 1960, when I had just turned 14, that I discovered there are different types of protection, and that sometimes those who should protect us are exactly who we should fear the most. On that Friday in March 1960, I woke up with a strange feeling in my chest, as if something in the air had changed during the night. It was the end of summer in Alabama, and the heat was already becoming unbearable, even early in the morning. Daddy was more serious than usual during breakfast, speaking quietly with John and Peter about some business he needed to take care of in town. "I'll have to spend the whole afternoon away," he said, stirring his coffee with brown sugar. "I need to talk to Colonel Wilson about selling those cattle heads, and then I need to go to the county clerk's office to resolve some papers for the deed of the new land." It was a Friday like many others. Daddy always went out on Fridays to resolve the week's business, leaving John in charge of the property. But this time, something was different. I could feel it in the boys' looks, in the way they behaved during breakfast, as if they all knew something I didn't. After we finished eating, Daddy went to get ready. He put on his nicest white shirt, his new denim pants, and the leather boots he only wore to go to town. He put Brill cream in his hair, put on his hat, and went out to the porch where the blue Ford pickup was waiting. "John, you're responsible for everything here," he said, adjusting the keys in his pocket. "Any problem, you solve it. And watch the younger boys. I don't want any mess in my absence." What happened after that moment changed my life forever. The sound of the pickup's engine starting echoed through the yard like a bell tolling the hour of death. It was a sound I had heard hundreds of times before, but that day it took on a completely different meaning. Daddy accelerated slowly, as he always did, raising a cloud of red dust that took a few minutes to settle. We all stood still on the porch, watching the pickup disappear around the bend in the road. And then I realized how the silence that descended over the house was different from the normal silence. It was a heavy, loaded silence, as if the air had become denser. Mama Rose went into the kitchen without saying a word, and I followed her to help with the breakfast dishes. But as we washed the cups and plates, I felt the boys' eyes on my back, as if they were studying me, evaluating me. "Mama, can I go to the yard to take care of the chickens?" I asked when we finished with the dishes. "Yes, my child, but don't be long, as we're going to make bread for the week today." I went out to the yard trying to occupy myself with the normal tasks of the day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The boys walked in small groups, whispering among themselves, stopping talking when I passed near. It was as if a conversation was happening that I couldn't hear. It must have been about 2 hours after Daddy left, when I was in the chicken coop gathering the day's eggs, that Michael appeared at the door. Michael was my brother by blood, 3 years older than me, a tall, thin young man who had always been affectionate with me. But that day, there was something different in the way he looked at me. "Mary, I need to talk to you," he said, in a voice I had never heard before. It was a low, somewhat hoarse voice, as if he were nervous. "What is it, Michael? Did something happen? Come with me. There's something you need to learn." Something in his tone left me cold inside. I left the basket with the eggs right there on the chicken coop floor and began to walk in the opposite direction from him. "Michael, I don't understand." "Learn what? You're 14 now, Mary. You're already at the age to know certain things about how women should behave with the men of the family." His words hit me like a bucket of cold water. I started running toward the house, but he was faster. He grabbed me by the arm, not with violence, but with a firmness that made it clear I had no choice. "No use running, Mary. Mama Rose is busy in the kitchen and won't hear you. And even if she did, she knows this is part of your education." "What education? What are you talking about?" "You'll understand when we get there." He took me by the hand, crossing the inner courtyard toward the back of the house, where the younger boys' rooms were. But instead of entering any of the rooms, he stopped in front of a door that I knew well, but rarely opened. It was the room that Daddy used to store old tools, some sacks of corn, and other things that didn't fit in the main storage. "Michael, why are we going to the tool room?" "Because that's where the girls in our family learn to become women." He opened the door, and what I saw inside left me breathless. It was no longer a messy storage room. Someone had tidied up the room, put an old mattress on the floor, hung a curtain over the only small window. It was as if it were a room specially prepared for something. "Come in, Mary." "No, I don't want to go in." "It's not a question of wanting. It's a question of obeying." That's when other footsteps echoed in the hallway behind us. I turned and saw John approaching, with an expression on his face that I had never seen before. Behind him came Peter, Anthony, Frank. One by one, all my brothers and cousins appeared, forming a semicircle around the door of the room. "John, what's happening?" I asked, my voice coming out weaker than I wanted. "What's happening is that you're going to learn what your place is in this family, Mary. You're going to learn to serve the men who take care of you." "I don't understand." "You don't need to understand now, you just need to obey." It was John who pushed me into the room. It wasn't a violent push, but it was firm enough to make me stumble and fall sitting on the edge of the mattress. The door closed behind me with a dry noise that echoed like a gunshot. I sat there, trembling, trying to understand what was happening. Outside, I heard low voices, whispers, as if they were organizing something. It was as if there was a plan that everyone knew except me. After a few minutes that seemed like hours, the door opened again. This time, it was Peter who entered, closing the door behind him. Peter was the second oldest, a 20-year-old young man, strong and quiet, who had always treated me like a little sister. But when he looked at me at that moment, his eyes were different. They were the eyes of a stranger. "Mary, you're going to stay quiet and do everything I tell you, understand?" "Peter, I want to get out of here. I want to go back to Mama. Mama Rose knows you're here. She knows what's going to happen. This is part of the education of every girl in this family." "What education? I don't understand." "You don't need to understand. You just need to obey." That's when I realized there was no escape. That those men I had called brothers all my life had transformed into something completely different. And that room had been prepared specifically for me, for that moment, for something terrible that I still couldn't fully comprehend. Peter approached slowly, and I cowered in the corner of the mattress. My mind was racing, trying to understand how I had reached that situation, how the men who should protect me had become my threat. "Please, Peter. I haven't done anything wrong. Why are you doing this to me?" "You haven't done anything wrong. You've just reached the right age." Then he crouched down to my height and firmly held my chin, forcing me to look into his eyes. "Now you're going to learn the first lesson about being a woman in this family. You're going to learn that our word is law and that you exist to serve us." I tried to get up, tried to run to the door, but he held me with ease. It was like trying to escape from a mountain. Peter was twice my size, twice as strong, and was determined to do something that I still couldn't fully understand. "Shh," he whispered, as if calming a frightened animal. "It will be quick if you don't resist. It will be much worse if you fight." It was at that moment that I understood what was happening. I understood what that room was for. I understood why all the boys were involved. I understood why Mama Rose hadn't come looking for me. It was a ritual, a tradition, something that happened every Friday when Daddy went to town. And I was the new participant in this ritual. What happened next, in those first minutes with Peter, was the beginning of my nightmare. I won't describe the details of what he did to me in that room, because some pains are too deep to be put into words. But when he finished, when he got up and adjusted his clothes as if nothing had happened, I was no longer the same girl who had entered there. "Now it's Michael's turn," he said, heading to the door. "Remember, if you scream, if you try to escape, it will be worse next time. Much worse." The door opened and closed. Peter left. Michael entered. And I understood that this was just beginning. One by one, they entered that room. Not all 15 at once. Some were too small. Others stood guard to make sure Mama Rose wouldn't interrupt us. But there were many. Many more than a 14-year-old girl should be able to endure. Between one and another, I was alone for a few minutes, lying on that mattress that smelled of mold and sweat, looking at the old wooden ceiling and trying to understand how my life had turned into that hell in a matter of hours. It was during one of these intervals that I got up, trembling, and went to the door. I tried to open it, but it was locked from the outside. I knocked softly, whispering, "Please, let me out. I promise I won't tell anyone. I promise I'll be obedient. Just let me out." From the other side of the door, I heard John's voice. "It's not over yet, Mary. A few more to go." And then I approached the small window and understood why they had put that curtain. It wasn't to darken the room. It was to muffle the sounds, so that even if I screamed, even if I begged for help, no one outside could hear. I knelt on the dirt floor and, with trembling hands, took an old towel that was thrown in a corner. I rolled it up tight and pushed it into the gap under the door. It was the last piece of hope draining away. I myself was helping to muffle my own screams. It was to muffle the sounds, I whispered to myself, tears streaming down my face, so that no one, not even God, could hear. And that's how I spent that endless Friday afternoon, measuring time not by the hands of a clock, but by the anguish of waiting. Waiting for it to end. Waiting for the next one to be the last. Waiting for the blessed sound of Daddy's pickup returning from town, which would mean the end of that torment. When I finally heard the roar of the Ford engine coming up the dirt road, It was almost night. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and purple, and I was shattered on the floor of that room without even the strength to cry anymore. The door opened for the last time that day. John entered, helped me get up, and said in a voice that tried to be gentle, "Now you know how things work here. Every Friday, when Daddy leaves, you come to this room. That's how it's always been with the women in this family. That's how it will always be. And if I tell Daddy, Daddy knows Mary. Who do you think built this room, folks? Can you really believe what I'm telling you? Tell me in the comments if you had brothers and what your relationship was like with them. I swear I'll read every comment." John's words echoed in my head like a cracked bell. Daddy knows. Who do you think built this room? At that moment, everything I believed about my family, about protection, about love, crumbled like a sandcastle touched by a violent wave. I returned to the main house staggering, my legs weak, my mind trying to process what I had just discovered. Mama Rose was in the kitchen preparing dinner, as if it were any ordinary day. When she saw me, she just nodded and said, "Go wash up and change clothes. Your father will be here soon, and we need to have dinner." There was no surprise in her voice. There was no concern. It was as if she knew exactly where I had spent the afternoon and why. I went to my room like a sleepwalker, looked at myself in the small mirror that sat on top of the dresser, and didn't recognize the person staring back at me. It was still Mary, but a different Mary. One who knew things she shouldn't know. One who had lost something she could never recover. When Daddy arrived that night, he greeted everyone normally, asked how the day had been, complimented the smell of the food Mama had prepared. During dinner, he talked about business in town, about the price of cattle, about the rain that was taking too long to come. It was a normal conversation in a normal family. Except that nothing was normal for me anymore. I tried to eat, but the food wouldn't go down. I tried to participate in the conversation, but the words wouldn't come out. Daddy looked at me across the table and asked, "Mary, you're quiet today. Did something happen?" It was John who answered, before I could even open my mouth. "She learned some important lessons today, Father. Lessons about responsibility and obedience." Daddy nodded, approving. "Very good. A woman only becomes a real woman when she learns what her place is in the world." That night, lying in my bed, looking at the dark ceiling, I began to understand that there was nowhere to run. There was no higher authority than Daddy on that property. There was no law beyond his law. And apparently, that law included what had happened to me that afternoon. I spent the whole week living in a strange fog. During the day, I tried to occupy myself with normal tasks, helping Mama, taking care of the chickens, washing clothes. But my mind was always going back to that back room, to John's words, to the terrible certainty that it would repeat on the following Friday. The boys behaved differently with me now. It wasn't open cruelty, but a forced intimacy that gave me chills. A look that lingered too long during breakfast. A hand on my shoulder that stayed too long. Comments that had double meanings and that only I understood. Michael, my own brother by blood, began to treat me as if I were his property. He ordered me to fetch water for him to wash, ordered me to make his bed, spoke to me in a tone of authority he had never used before. "Mary, come here and comb my hair," he would say, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Mary, go to my room and get my clean shirt. Mary, you forgot to wash my pants. Go wash them now." It was as if, after that first Friday, I had become a personal maid to all of them. Not just a sister, but something lesser, something that existed to serve. Mama Rose observed all of this without saying a word. Sometimes I felt like running to her, crying in her lap, begging her to protect me. But I always remembered her words that afternoon. Go wash up and change clothes. She knew. She had always known. And somehow, she thought it was right. The second Friday came like a death sentence. I woke up that day with a knotted stomach, could barely eat breakfast, spent the whole morning throwing up from nervousness. When Daddy announced he was going out to town, I felt my legs go weak. "I have to go to Huntsville today," he said, adjusting his hat. "I'm going to resolve some business with a cattle buyer from there. I might be later than usual." Later than usual. That meant more time in that back room. More time of torment, more time of humiliation. This time, when I heard the sound of the pickup moving away, I didn't try to fool myself into thinking that nothing would happen. I knew it would happen. I knew it was inevitable. I knew that this was my life now. It was Anthony who came to get me this time. Anthony, who was 17 and had always been the most cheerful of my brothers. But when he appeared at the kitchen door and said, "Come, Mary," his cheerfulness was gone. In its place was something that reminded me of Daddy, a cold and relentless authority. I went with him because I had no choice. I walked through the corridors of the house I had known since I was born, but which now seemed strange, threatening. Each step took me closer to that room that had become the center of my nightmare. This time, when I got there, I saw they had made some improvements. They had put a basin with water and soap in a corner for me to clean up between one and another. They had hung a small mirror on the wall, as if I needed to see myself during that torture. They had even put an old chair where they could sit and wait their turn. "You already know how it works," said Anthony, closing the door behind us. "I don't need to explain again." And so began my second session in that hell. This time, I knew what to expect. I knew it would be Peter first, then Michael, then the others. I knew it would last for hours. I knew that in the end, I would be broken on the floor, waiting for the sound of Daddy's pickup. But there was a difference this second time. During the intervals, when I was alone in that room, I began to observe the details around me more carefully. I began to study each person who came in, each behavior, each word. It wasn't conscious yet, but I was beginning to look for cracks in that wall of cruelty. It was during the third Friday that I realized something important. Not all of them participated with the same enthusiasm. Some seemed to be there out of obligation, not out of their own will. Some avoided looking into my eyes. Some trembled almost as much as I did. In particular, I noticed that Charlie, one of the younger cousins who was only 15 years old, was always last in line. And when it was his turn, he always made up some excuse not to go in. "I have a stomachache," he would say. "I'm very tired today. I think I heard a car sound on the road." The others mocked him, called him soft, called him a little girl. But John always ended up letting it go, perhaps because he knew Daddy would soon arrive, and it was better not to insist. On the fourth Friday, something changed. Charlie wasn't even in line. When they asked about him, Michael said he was sick, with a fever, bedridden. But I knew it wasn't true. I had seen him working in the garden early in the morning, as healthy as ever. On the fifth Friday, the same thing. Charlie sick again. And this time, when Frank went looking for him to make sure he was really in his room, he didn't find him anywhere. "He must have gone fishing at the pond," said John, but there was irritation in his voice. "Let it go. We're already wasting too much time." It was on this fifth Friday that I made a decision that would change everything. While I was in that room, suffering what had become my weekly routine of horror, I began to plan. I began to think about Charlie. I began to wonder if he could be the crack I was looking for. Charlie was the son of one of Daddy's uncles who had died in a work accident 3 years earlier. His mother had moved to Memphis soon after, but couldn't afford to take her son with her. Daddy had offered to raise the boy, and everyone thought it was an act of kindness and generosity. But I began to wonder if Charlie saw things the same way. If for him, that house was a home or a prison. If he participated in those rituals of his own free will or out of fear. If he, like me, was looking for a way to escape. During the week that followed, I began to observe Charlie more carefully. I noticed that he always stayed more apart from the other boys. I noticed that during meals, he ate in silence, looking at his plate, as if he wanted to become invisible. I noticed that at night, when the others stayed on the porch talking and laughing, he disappeared somewhere. One Thursday night, I discovered where he went. I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and passing by the hallway window, saw a small shadow in the yard. It was Charlie, sitting alone under the big mango tree, looking at the stars. There was something in his posture that caught my attention. It wasn't the posture of someone who was just relaxing after a day of work. It was the posture of someone who was suffering. Someone who was lost. Someone who, perhaps, was looking for answers in the night sky. On the following Friday, when Daddy announced he was traveling to Chattanooga to resolve some problems with the documentation of some lands, I felt the familiar tightening in my stomach. But this time, along with the fear, there was something else. There was a plan forming in my head. When John came to get me, as he always did, I went with him without resisting. I entered that cursed room for the 6th time, lay down on that mattress that I knew so well, and waited. But this time, I was paying attention to who came in and who didn't. Peter came in first, as always. Then Michael. Then Anthony. One by one, they came in and out, using me as if I were an object, as if I had no feelings, as if I weren't a person. But when it got close to the end, when it was almost 5 in the afternoon and the sun was beginning to set, I noticed that Charlie wasn't in line again. And this time, when Frank went looking for him, he came back with a worried expression. I didn't find him anywhere. I looked in his room, in the garden, in the barn, at the pond. Nothing. Then forget it, said John, irritated. If he doesn't want to participate, it's his problem. When Daddy gets home and finds out he's running away from his responsibilities, let him explain. But I knew Charlie wasn't running away from responsibilities. He was running away from torture. And at that moment, looking at the ceiling of that room where everything bad that had happened in my life had begun, I was sure I had found my crack. Charlie was like me. Charlie was suffering. And maybe, just maybe, he would be willing to help me break that cycle of horror that had become our life. In the week that followed, my life turned into a careful strategy of observation. I knew I needed to approach Charlie somehow, but I also knew I couldn't be obvious. Any wrong move, any suspicious conversation, and John or one of the others might suspect and make everything even worse for me. During the days, I continued with my normal obligations, helping Mama Rose in the kitchen, taking care of the chickens, washing clothes. But now each task had a dual purpose. When I went to fetch firewood in the backyard, I looked for Charlie. When I hung clothes on the clothesline, I kept an eye on his movements. When I helped serve meals, I paid attention to how he behaved with the others. What I discovered was revealing. Charlie was treated by the other boys as a pariah. It wasn't open cruelty, but a kind of subtle contempt that I began to recognize. During meals, he was always left with the worst piece of meat, the most uncomfortable chair. When they divided tasks, they always gave him the heaviest and most unpleasant work. And when they made jokes or told stories, he was never included. It was as if he was tolerated there, but not accepted, as if his presence was an obligation, not a pleasure. And the more I observed, the more I realized that this wasn't by chance. There was something about Charlie that bothered the others, something that made him different from the pack. One Tuesday morning, I finally got my first real opportunity to talk to him. Mama Rose had sent me to the small pond to fetch water for washing clothes, and when I got there, I found Charlie sitting on the edge with his feet in the water, looking at nothing. "Hi, Charlie," I said, lowering the bucket into the water. He was startled, as if he had been caught doing something wrong. "Hi, Mary. Sorry, I was just leaving. You don't need to leave because of me. The pond is big enough for both of us." He looked at me with a strange expression, as if he wasn't used to kindness coming from someone in the family. We stayed silent for a few minutes, me slowly filling the bucket to buy time, him moving his fingers in the water. "Charlie," I finally said, "can I ask you a question?" "Sure. Do you like living here?" The question caught him off guard. He looked at me with wide eyes, as if I had asked something dangerous. "Why are you asking that?" "Just curious. It must be hard being away from your mother, isn't it?" It was as if I had touched an open wound. I saw tears forming in his eyes, and he tried to hide them by looking away. "Sometimes I dream that she comes to get me," he whispered, "but I know it will never happen. She doesn't even have money for the bus ticket. And if you could leave here, would you leave?" He looked me directly in the eyes for the first time. "Why are you asking these things, Mary? If someone hears, no one will hear. It's just between the two of us." Charlie was silent for a long time, as if thinking about whether he could trust me. Finally, his voice came out very softly, almost a whisper. "I would run away. I would leave today if I could." "Why?" "You know why." And it was at that moment that I understood that he knew about the back room. He knew about Fridays. He knew about the horror I lived through every week. And more importantly, he didn't want to be a part of it. "Charlie," I said, my voice trembling with nervousness, have Have you ever participated in the things that happen when Daddy travels? He turned red as a beet and shook his head vigorously. John wants me to participate. Says it's part of being a man in this family. But I can't. It's not right, Mary. It's not right what they do to you. I felt a wave of relief so great that I almost collapsed right there on the edge of the pond. I had found someone who saw the situation the same way I did. Someone who knew it was wrong. Someone who, maybe, could help me. And what do you do when they tell you to go there? I hide. I pretend I'm sick. I disappear into the woods. Anything not to have to do that to you. And they don't get angry? They do. John said if I keep refusing, he'll tell your father I'm weak, useless. He said your father might send me away. And are you afraid of being sent away? I am, and I'm not. I'm afraid because I don't know where to go. But also, sometimes I think it would be better to be anywhere that wasn't here. I finished filling the bucket, but didn't get up to leave. I knew that conversation was too important to be interrupted. Charlie, if I tell you something, do you promise not to tell anyone? I promise. I'm thinking of a way to get out of this situation, but I can't do it alone. I need someone to help me. He looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear. What kind of help? I don't know exactly yet, but I know it needs to be someone from inside the family, someone who knows the scheme, someone they trust, and at the same time, someone who doesn't agree with what's happening. You're talking about me? I am. Charlie was silent for a long time, nervously fidgeting with his hands. I could see that he was struggling with himself, weighing the risks, trying to decide if he could trust me. If they find out we talked about this, he finally said, they won't find out. We'll be careful. And what do you want me to do? For now, nothing. I just want to know if I can count on you when the time comes. If when I have a plan, you'll help me execute it. And what would this plan be? I don't know yet. But it has to be something that exposes what they're doing. Something that forces Daddy to stop this. Your father knows what happens, Mary. He's the one who ordered that room to be built. I know. But one thing is for him to know and allow it in secret. Another thing is for it to become public, for other people in town to find out. Daddy cares a lot about his reputation. Charlie nodded slowly. It's true. He would be furious if anyone from outside knew. So will you help me? He took a deep breath, as if he were making the most important decision of his life. I will. I can't stand living like this anymore. I can't stand knowing that you're suffering and I'm not doing anything to help. I lifted the heavy bucket of water and began to walk back to the house. But before I left the pond, I turned to him one last time. Charlie, from now on, we'll have to pretend we're just normal cousins. We can't give any sign that we're allies. Agreed? Agreed. But how will we communicate? Leave it to me. I'll think of a way. In the days that followed, Charlie and I developed a discreet communication system. When I wanted to talk to him, I would leave a small stone on the kitchen windowsill. When he saw the stone, he knew he should meet me at the pond after dinner. When he wanted to talk to me, he would tie a blade of grass on the chicken coop fence. It was risky, but it worked. During these secret conversations, we began to develop a plan. At first, they were just vague ideas, thoughts about how we could expose what was happening. But gradually, the ideas became more concrete, more viable. The inspiration came on a Thursday night when Daddy came home with some news. He had bought a small tape recorder, the kind that worked with batteries to use in his business. He wanted to record the important conversations he had in town, so he wouldn't forget the details later. It's modern technology coming to the country, he said, proudly showing the little device to the whole family. With this here, I won't miss any important detail of my negotiations. When I saw that recorder, I immediately knew what our plan would be. It was perfect. It was small enough to be hidden, quiet enough not to be noticed, and powerful enough to clearly capture voices. That night, I left the stone on the kitchen windowsill. When I met Charlie at the pond, he saw in my face that something had changed. I have a plan, I said, barely able to contain my excitement. And it's a plan that might work. I explained to him about the recorder, about how we could use it to record what happened in the back room. If we could get a clear recording of the voices, the orders, the sounds, we would have irrefutable proof of what was happening. And after we have the recording, he asked, then you deliver it to Daddy. Say you discovered it by accident, that you were passing by the room and heard. Pretend you were horrified, that you didn't know this was happening. And why would I do that? Why would I turn in my own cousins and brothers? Because you're different from them, Charlie. Because you have a conscience. And because when Daddy hears that recording and realizes that his family secret is recorded on a device that can be heard by anyone, he'll be desperate. You think he'll stop everything? I think he won't have a choice. His reputation is worth more than anything. If there's a risk of this recording reaching the ears of someone outside the family, he'll do anything to prevent that from happening. Charlie thought for a few minutes, visualizing the plan in his head. When do you want to do this? Next Friday. Daddy said he's going to Huntsville again, so he'll take a while to return. It will give us enough time to hide the recorder, make the recording, and take it out before anyone suspects. And where will we hide it? Under that old chair in the corner. It's the perfect place. Close enough to capture everything, but hidden enough for no one to see. And if they discover the recorder during the things, they won't discover it. They're too focused on what they're doing to pay attention to details. And besides, it's always kind of dark in there. We left that conversation with our roles well defined. Charlie would be responsible for borrowing the recorder without Daddy noticing. I would be responsible for hiding it in the room at the right time. And in the end, he would deliver the recording to Daddy, pretending to have discovered everything by accident. It was a risky plan, full of variables that could go wrong. But it was our only chance to break that cycle of horror that had dominated my life for the past few months. It was our only chance to transform one of the monsters into our ally, using the family's own power structure to destroy the system that imprisoned me. On the following Friday, when Daddy announced he was traveling to Huntsville, I felt a mixture of terror and expectation. I knew it would be another afternoon of suffering, but I also knew it might be the last. If our plan worked, if we got the recording we needed, everything would change. The recorder was hidden in my underwear, small and warm against my skin. Charlie had managed to take it the night before, when Daddy was distracted talking to Mama Rose about corn prices. When I heard the familiar sound of the pickup moving away, I took a deep breath and prepared to put our plan into action. When John came to get me that Friday, my heart was beating so hard that I was sure he could hear it. The small recorder was hidden in my blouse, warm against my skin, seeming to weigh much more than it actually did. Each step toward the back room was a struggle between the terror of what was going to happen and the hope that we finally had a way out. "Today, Daddy will take longer to return," said John as we walked through the corridors. "So we have plenty of time to educate you properly." His words froze my blood, but also confirmed that our plan had chosen the perfect day. More time meant that the recording would be more complete, more incriminating, more evidence of the horror I lived through every week. When we reached the room, I took a deep breath and entered as I always did. But this time, I had a mission. While John closed the door and turned to talk to someone outside, I took the opportunity to quickly crouch near the old chair in the corner. With movements I had mentally rehearsed hundreds of times, I took the recorder from my blouse and pushed it under the chair, turning it on with the same movement. "What are you doing down there?" asked John, turning to me. "A button fell off my blouse," I lied, getting up quickly. I already found it. He didn't suspect anything. Why would he? To them I was just an object, a doll that had no thoughts of its own, that wasn't capable of planning anything. This underestimation of theirs was exactly what saved our plan. What happened in the following hours was the same horror as always, but this time I endured it, knowing that every cruel word, every humiliating order, every degrading sound was being recorded on that little device hidden in the corner of the room. It was as if I was collecting ammunition for a war I could finally fight. Peter came in first, as always. But this time, when he started talking to me in that tone of superiority that I knew so well, I thought about the recorder capturing every word. "Today you're going to learn some new things, Mary. Things that a proper woman needs to know to please a man." Michael came next, and with him came a verbal cruelty that was almost worse than the rest. He liked to humiliate with words, to explain to me exactly what my place was in that family, what my role was as the only woman in the house. "You exist to serve us, Mary. Daddy raised you for this, to be our property, our entertainment." Each word entered the recorder like a confession. Each phrase became evidence of what really happened in that house that from the outside seemed so blessed by God. One by one, they came in and out. Anthony, Frank, Joseph Jr., Severino, some of the older cousins, each one leaving their mark of cruelty recorded on that device they didn't even dream existed. The hardest was when it was Manuel's turn, my youngest brother by blood, who was only 16. Seeing someone I had helped raise, someone I had taken care of when he was little, treating me as if I were less than human, was a pain that cut deeper than any physical wound. "I'm sorry, Mary," he whispered when he came in. "But John said if I don't do this, he'll tell Daddy I'm weak. And you know what Daddy does to those he thinks are weak." It was the first time someone had apologized. It was the first time someone showed they knew it was wrong. And even being a small crack in the cruelty, it hurt even more because it showed that they knew exactly what they were doing to me. The hours passed as they always passed, slowly, painfully, marked only by the succession of faces that came in and out of that cursed room. But this time, there was something different in the air. There was hope. There was the certainty that this would be the last time. When I finally heard the sound of Daddy's pickup coming up the dirt road, it was almost night. The last rays of sun were coming through the small window, painting the room with an orange light that seemed unreal after so many hours of horror. John came in for the last time to give me the usual instructions about keeping the secret, about how I should behave during dinner, about the terrible consequences that awaited me if I dared to tell Daddy anything. "Always remember, Mary, Daddy knows this happens. He wants it to be this way. If you try to change things, it will be much worse for you." When he left, I was alone in the room for a few minutes. I waited to be absolutely sure there was no one around. Then I crawled to the chair in the corner and took the recorder. It was warm, still working, still recording. With hands trembling from nervousness and emotion, I turned it off and hid it back in my blouse. I left the room like a shadow, walked through the empty corridors to my own room, and hid the recorder at the bottom of the drawer of my underwear. It was the evidence we needed. It was our weapon against years of terror. That night, during dinner, I played the usual role. Quiet girl, submissive, who had spent a peaceful afternoon helping Mama Rose with household chores. Daddy told about the business in Huntsville, about the people he had met, about the cattle prices that were better than expected. "It was a productive day," he said, cutting the piece of roast meat that Mama had prepared. "I resolved some important business, made some new contacts. Our family is prospering, thank God." If he knew what had really happened in that house while he was away, if he knew that his prosperity was being built on the suffering of his own daughter, but soon he would know. Soon he would hear every word, every moan, every cruel order that had been recorded on that small tape hidden in my room. On Saturday morning, I left the stone on the kitchen windowsill. When I met Charlie at the pond after lunch, he immediately saw in my face that the plan had worked. "Did you get it?" he asked, barely able to contain his anxiety. "I got it. It's all recorded. Every word, every voice, every horrible thing they said." I took the recorder from my blouse and placed it in his hand. It seemed too small to carry so much weight, so much evidence, so much power for change. "And now you do your part. You go to Daddy tomorrow morning, very early, before he leaves for work. You'll say you found this thrown in the yard, that you were curious and decided to listen. You'll pretend you were horrified by what you heard. And if he's suspicious of me, and if he finds it strange that I found exactly this, he won't be suspicious. You're just an orphaned cousin who lives here out of charity. For him, you don't have enough courage or intelligence to plan something like this." Charlie kept the recorder in his pants pocket, but there was doubt in his eyes. "Mary, what if this doesn't work? What if instead of stopping everything, he gets even more furious?" "It will work," I said, with a conviction that I didn't know where it came from. "It will work because the only thing Daddy loves more than power over this family is his reputation out there. And if he knows there's a recording of these things circulating, he'll do anything to protect his name. And after I deliver this to him, what will happen to me? You'll be the hero of the story. You'll be the brave boy who discovered a terrible thing and had the courage to tell the authority of the family. Daddy will see you with different eyes. And you? What will happen to you?" That was the question I didn't want to ask myself. I didn't know what Daddy would do to me when he discovered that I had orchestrated that plan. I didn't know if he would see me as a victim or as a traitor, but I knew that anything would be better than continuing to live that hell every Friday. I'll be fine, I lied. The important thing is that this will end. Forever. Sunday morning came like a different dawn. I woke up knowing that by the end of that day, my life would have completely changed. Either for the better, if our plan worked, or for much worse, if it failed. During breakfast, I discreetly observed Charlie. He was nervous, moving his food around a lot, avoiding looking directly at anyone. But when our eyes met for a second, I saw determination there. He was going to do his part. After breakfast, when Daddy went out to the porch to have his small coffee and read an old newspaper he had brought from town, Charlie got up from the table with a solemn expression. "Mr. Cooper," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "can I talk to you? It's about something important I discovered." Daddy raised his eyes from the newspaper, surprised. Charlie rarely spoke to him directly, rarely took any initiative. "What is it, boy? Speak up." "It's better if we talk in private, sir. It's a serious matter." Daddy closed the newspaper and looked at Charlie more carefully. There was something in the boy's tone that had aroused his curiosity. "Then come inside. Let's talk in my office." They went into the house and I stayed on the porch, pretending I was interested in feeding the chickens, but with all my senses concentrated on trying to hear what was happening inside. Daddy's office was at the back of the house, but I still managed to hear some fragments of the conversation. Charlie's voice, nervous, explaining how he had found the recorder. Daddy's voice, first irritated, then concerned. And then, silence. A silence that lasted almost half an hour. A silence during which I knew Daddy was listening to that recording, listening to the voices of his own sons and nephews confessing the crimes they committed every Friday in the back room. When the voices returned, they were different. Daddy's voice was lower, more controlled, but loaded with a fury that I could feel even from afar. Charlie's voice was even more nervous, but also relieved, as if the most difficult weight had been lifted from his shoulders. After a few more minutes, I heard heavy footsteps approaching. Daddy came out of the office with an expression on his face that I had never seen before. It wasn't common anger. It was the expression of a man who had discovered that his empire was built on a secret that could destroy him. Behind him came Charlie, pale but determined. When our eyes met, he made an almost imperceptible sign with his head. It had worked. Daddy had heard everything, and now it was time to see what he would do with that information. "John!" shouted Daddy with a voice that made the whole house tremble. "Come here now!" And that's how the end of our nightmare began, with a shout of fury from a patriarch who had discovered that his absolute authority had been challenged, recorded, and transformed into evidence that could destroy everything he had built. John appeared running from the east wing of the house, with his shirt half open and his hair disheveled, as if he had just woken up from a nap. When he saw the expression on Daddy's face, his face completely changed. It was like seeing a boy turning into an adult in a matter of seconds, realizing that something very serious was happening. "What is it, Father? Did something happen?" Daddy didn't answer immediately. He stood looking at John with those small, piercing eyes, as if he were seeing for the first time who that man he had raised really was. The silence extended for so long that even the little birds in the yard seemed to stop singing. "Come into the office," Daddy finally said, in a low voice that was much more frightening than any shout. "And call Peter, Michael, Anthony, Frank. Call everyone. Now!" John tried to ask some question, but Daddy's look silenced him on the spot. He ran off to get the others, and in a few minutes the whole house was in an uproar. The boys were arriving one by one, all with the face of someone who didn't understand what was happening, but knew it was serious. I stayed on the porch, pretending to feed the chickens, but paying attention to every movement. Charlie had disappeared, probably hidden in his room so as not to appear suspicious. Mama Rose appeared at the kitchen door, drying her hands on her apron, with that worried expression she always had when Daddy got too serious. "Mary, come inside," she said softly. "When your father gets like this, it's better for us not to be in the way." But I didn't want to miss anything. This was the moment I had dreamed about for months. Finally, Daddy was going to discover the truth about what happened in his house when he went out. Finally, Someone with authority was going to confront those monsters who hid behind smiles of protective brothers. "You go, Mama. I'll be right there." She looked at me strangely, but went into the house. Mama Rose always knew how to stay out of men's business, even when that business involved her daughter. From the office, voices began to come. First low, then louder. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was getting more and more tense. Daddy talked for long periods, and then came short, nervous answers from the boys. Suddenly, I heard a dry noise, as if someone had hit their hand hard on the table. Then, the loudest shout I had ever heard Daddy give in my entire life. "Liars! All of you! Liars and scoundrels!" The silence that followed was even more frightening than the shout. It was as if the entire house was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Then the real discussion began. Voices rising, people talking at the same time, Daddy shouting orders that I couldn't quite understand. I heard my name being mentioned several times, always followed by curse words and accusations that made me understand that they knew they had been discovered. The office door opened with such force that it hit the wall. John came out first, with a red face and frightened eyes. Behind him came Peter and Michael, also with faces of men who had just received the beating of their lives. Not physical, but with words that cut deeper than any belt. Daddy appeared at the office door holding the recorder in his hand as if it were a weapon. His voice echoed through the entire house. "Now you're going to learn what happens when someone dishonors the name of this family." What happened next was something I had never seen before. Daddy, the man who had always controlled everything with calm and quiet authority, completely lost control. But it wasn't a casual loss of control. It was a calculated, planned, devastating fury. He called all the boys to the central courtyard of the house. One by one they appeared, all 15, including Charlie, who came out of his room trying to appear confused about what was happening. Mama Rose and I stayed on the porch, observing from afar, but Daddy made sure we were present. "Mary, come here," he said, pointing to a place beside him. "You're going to watch this." When I approached, I saw that Daddy was trembling. Not from fear, but from an anger so deep that it was making his body vibrate like a guitar string. He raised the recorder for everyone to see. "You know what's in here?" he asked, his voice coming out low but sharp as a razor. "It has your voices. It has every dirty word that came out of your mouths. It has the proof that my own sons turned into animals without my permission." John tried to say something, but Daddy cut him off with a look that could kill. "Shut up! You'll speak when I tell you to." Daddy began to walk back and forth in front of those men, like a general inspecting soldiers who had committed treason. Each step of his echoed on the cement floor like a death sentence. "You thought I was an idiot?" he asked. "You thought you could do whatever you wanted in my house, with my daughter, behind my back, and that I would never find out?" "Father, we can explain," Michael tried. "Explain what?" Daddy's shout was so loud that even the neighborhood dogs began to bark. "You're going to explain how you turned my daughter into a... He couldn't finish the sentence. For a moment, I thought he was going to cry. But instead of tears, what came was more anger. "You dishonored this family," he said, now speaking low again, which was even more frightening. "You dishonored my name. You dishonored the name of your ancestors. And worst of all, you did this hidden from me, as if you were filthy criminals." It was then that I understood what the real issue was for Daddy. It wasn't what they had done to me. It was the fact that they had done it without his permission. It was the disobedience, not the crime. It was the disrespect to his authority, not the suffering they had caused me. "John," said Daddy, pointing to his oldest son, "you were responsible for this house in my absence. It was your obligation to maintain order and decency. Instead, you organized this." John tried to defend himself. "Father, I thought you knew that it was normal." "Normal?" Daddy took 2 steps in John's direction, and the 22-year-old man backed away as if he were a 5-year-old child. "Normal is respecting the rules of the house. Normal is asking permission. Normal is maintaining the dignity of the family." Then Daddy turned to all the others and made the announcement that changed everything. "From today on, things will be different in this house. Very different." He started with the immediate punishments. John lost all the privileges of being the oldest son. He could no longer go to town on Saturdays, could no longer make decisions about the farm, could no longer give orders to anyone. Peter received the same treatment. Michael, Anthony, and Frank were demoted to simple workers, with no right to an opinion about anything. "You're going to work from sunup to sundown," said Daddy. "You're going to eat after everyone else. You're going to sleep on the floor if necessary. You're going to learn what respect is the hard way." But the bigger punishment came later. "And there's one more thing. You will never speak a word to Mary again. You will never look at her. You will never breathe the same air as her if I can help it." Daddy turned to me, and for the first time since everything had begun months ago, I saw something like affection in his eyes. It wasn't exactly paternal love, but it was at least recognition that I existed as a person, not just as property. "Mary, you're going to have a new room. In the main wing, next to ours. You'll have a key. You'll have privacy. And if any of these scoundrels approaches you, you can come tell me, and I'll break his neck." Then he did something that completely surprised me. He turned to Charlie and said, "Charlie, you did the right thing. You showed character when all the others showed they were shameless. From today on, you're my right-hand man. You're going to help me maintain order in this house." Charlie turned red and just nodded, agreeing. Our eyes met for a second, and I saw that he was as surprised as I was with the turn of events. Daddy wasn't finished. He turned to the others and made the final announcement. "And so you never forget what happens when someone disobeys the rules of this house." He went to the back room, that cursed room that had been the center of my nightmare for so many months. He returned with a can of kerosene. "You're going to burn this room," he said. "You're going to burn everything in it. The mattress, the chair, everything. And then you're going to punch the walls until they turn to dust." Watching that room being destroyed was like seeing my nightmare catching fire along with it. The flames licked the walls where I had suffered so much, consuming every bad memory, every moment of terror. When everything turned to ashes, I felt as if a part of my soul had finally been liberated. But Daddy still wasn't finished with the changes. In the days that followed, he completely restructured the hierarchy of the house. The boys who had participated in what he called the conspiracy against the family were all demoted. Some of the younger cousins, who hadn't participated because they were too small, were promoted to positions of trust. The family dynamic changed radically. During meals, there was a heavy silence. John, Peter, and Michael ate with their heads down, like ashamed dogs. Charlie sat beside Daddy, receiving guidance about the farm work. And I could finally eat in peace without feeling predatory looks on me. Mama Rose never commented on anything that had happened. It was as if she had woken up one day and discovered that the house rules had changed overnight and simply accepted the new reality. Maybe she always knew that one day things would explode. Maybe she was even relieved. The most impressive thing was seeing how Daddy took total control of the situation. He didn't just punish the guilty, he rebuilt the entire family system in a way that something like this could never happen again. He established new rules, new schedules, new supervision. It was as if he had realized that his empire had almost crumbled because of his absence, and now he was determined to never leave the house again without having absolute certainty that everything was under control. For me, it was like being reborn. For the first time in months, I could walk through the house without fear. I could sleep without having nightmares. I could wake up on Fridays without feeling terror in my stomach. The sound of Daddy's pickup leaving was no longer the signal for my hell. It was just the sound of a car leaving. Charlie became my silent protector. We never openly talked about what we had done together, but there was an understanding between us. He had risked everything to help me, and that had changed not only my life, but his as well. From a rejected orphaned cousin, he became Daddy's trusted person, the new one responsible for the order of the house. Years later, when I got married and left the farm, Daddy never again allowed so many men to live under the same roof. Charlie told me that he had become much more rigorous with everyone, much more present, much more controlling. It was as if he had learned that delegating authority was too dangerous. John, Peter, and Michael never fully recovered from the humiliation. They continued living on the farm, working as employees of their own father, but never again having the trust or respect they had before. It was a punishment that lasted for the rest of their lives. Today, looking back, I understand that our victory wasn't perfect. Daddy didn't stop what was happening because he understood it was wrong. He stopped because he discovered he was being betrayed. But the final result was the same. I was freed from a hell that seemed to have no end. The strength I found to plan and execute that plan changed who I was forever. I discovered that even in the most desperate situation, there's always a crack in the wall. There's always an unexpected ally. There's always a way to transform the very structure that oppresses us into a weapon for our liberation. My dears, congratulations for having listened to me this far. These days, people can't listen to someone speak for more than a few seconds. So if you really made it this far, thank you very much. For me to know who the dear ones who are really with me here are, comment the word courage. If this story moved you in any way, if it brought some kind of reflection or hope, I ask from the bottom of my heart that you like this video and subscribe to